In the shadows of history lie fragments erased, whispers buried beneath stone and steel, truths locked behind redacted pages. What was hidden was never lost, only concealed in vaults, in ruined tunnels, in the silence of men who dared not speak. These are not legends, but scars. Classified echoes of war machines, vanished operatives, and secret experiments that defied the conscience of nations. When silence replaces truth, the question remains, what was so dangerous it could never be remembered? On the night of April 19, 1945, just weeks before Germany's formal capitulation, an operation was authorized under the direct authority of the British Special Operations Executive and the US Office of Strategic Services. Codenamed Operation Paper Veil, it was officially described as a joint reconnaissance and seizure mission targeting an enemy technological installation in the Harz Mountains near the town of Nordhausen. What it sought to recover has never been officially disclosed. The documents that remain, scattered between British National Archives, the CIA's declassified reading room, and a handful of interviews, form a broken trail of testimony that points to something neither side has ever been willing to explain. One of the earliest references appears in an MI6 directive labeled CX 89345. Dated April 14, 1945, it identifies subterranean industrial structures, previously undisclosed to Allied reconnaissance, and specifically mentions the Mittelbau Dora complex, notorious for its use of slave labor in constructing the V-2 rocket. Yet, unlike the well-documented seizure of V-weapons material, the Paper Veil Directive singled out a secondary facility 11 kilometers south, marked only as Object 74. The accompanying map, later redacted, contained hand-drawn annotations that intelligence officers believe were copied from captured German engineers. At dawn on April 20th, 32 men, American Rangers from the 5th Battalion, reinforced by British commandos from No. 2 SAS, were flown into a temporary landing zone near Blankenberg. Their orders, preserved in a fragmentary after-action note, instructed them to secure the facility, retrieve all relevant material, and eliminate potential intelligence compromise. What followed can only be pieced together from fragments. The official mission log terminates abruptly after the initial insertion. A separate, heavily censored War Office memorandum from May 1945 confirms non-standard casualties incurred and states that equipment retrieval was incomplete due to structural destabilization. Yet, in the margins of one carbon copy, kept by an unnamed clerk, appears a note scrawled in pencil. Men report machine with no engine, lights without wires, screaming when doors forced. Whether the annotation was an embellishment or an eyewitness aside has never been resolved. Post-war testimonies lend little clarity. Sergeant William Hadley, one of only 3 surviving commandos linked to the operation, spoke in a 1978 BBC interview of a cavernous hall larger than any factory I had seen with tracks leading to nowhere. He recalled the presence of an object, half completed, like a cylinder with wings but no seams. His recollections ended with a sudden collapse of the chamber, forcing his team to withdraw. The BBC never aired the full tape. Portions remain, sealed. The US files tell a different story. OSS case officer Charles L. Quinn filed a confidential report in June 1945 noting the disappearance of at least 14 personnel, their status listed as missing in action. Yet no formal notification was ever made to families, and the names of those men never appear in unit rolls. When historian Martin Bremer attempted to trace the 5th Ranger Battalion's April 1945 assignments, he found entire days unaccounted for, replaced in official ledgers with the phrase "detached duty undisclosed." Rumors persisted throughout the early Cold War. In 1952, an internal Air Ministry memo referred obliquely to the Nordhausen incident in the context of rapid Soviet advances in jet propulsion. The note concluded with the chilling line, "If their engineers secured even fragments, it explains their acceleration." No further explanation was offered. Declassified CIA intercepts from the same year indicate Soviet efforts to excavate sealed shafts in the Harz region, though none confirm what, if anything, was found. By the 1960s, paper veil had been reduced to whispers within military research circles. One of the few individuals to press for answers was Dr. Klaus Eberhardt, a German-born physicist who had defected to Britain in 1946. In an unpublished manuscript discovered among his papers after his death in 1983, Eberhardt described conversations with fellow scientists at Farnborough who spoke of an energy source not dependent on combustion, experimental but functional. He claimed that British intelligence had confiscated sketches resembling a circular rotorless turbine, though no technical drawings survive today. The human cost remains the most obscure element. British Ministry of Defence records list 3 fatalities from a training accident on April 22, 1945 in Sussex. Yet cross-referenced with Hadley's recollections, those names match men he swore were killed in Nordhausen. When the families of the deceased pressed for details, they were given standard condolence letters citing operational hazards. None were permitted to view the bodies. The final trace of Operation Paper Veil appears in a 1946 parliamentary inquiry into war material recovery. A single typed page notes, "Certain recovered articles are hereby designated under the Official Secrets Act, indefinite classification. Custody transferred to Joint Allied Scientific Intelligence Committee." All subsequent references vanish. Researchers searching the archives in the 1990s discovered entire files missing from their catalogue numbers, replaced by empty folders stamped "withdrawn." To this day, the caves around Nordhausen remain unstable, much of the complex dynamited by both retreating Germans and subsequent Allied demolition teams. Local legends speak of American soldiers seen hauling crates onto trucks under armed guard, then disappearing into the night. An elderly farmer interviewed in 1994 described hearing metallic shrieks from underground during the final weeks of the war. Sounds unlike any conventional machinery. The absence of evidence is, in itself, evidence of erasure. Men died, records were altered, and artifacts, whatever they were, vanished into secrecy. Paper Veil remains a shadow between history and speculation, a fragment of the war that refuses to resolve. Whether it was a prototype aircraft, an abandoned deception, or something more disruptive to the known timeline of military technology, the truth was buried alongside the men who entered that mountain and never emerged. Until the sealed files of London and Washington are opened, it exists only as a ghost, an operation without an ending. In the spring of 1947, nearly 2 years after Germany's unconditional surrender, Soviet naval intelligence began receiving sporadic reports of unusual activity along the Baltic coast near Gdansk. Fishing crews complained of unexplained currents, pulling their nets toward the seabed. Patrol boats logged compass malfunctions. One trawler captain reported that our watches lost 20 minutes in less than an hour. These incidents prompted Moscow to dispatch an NKVD technical unit, operating under the cover of coastal security patrols. Their classified report, archived under the title Dossier Baltica 32, would later identify radiation levels far exceeding normal maritime background, an anomaly that pointed towards something hidden beneath the waters. Declassified fragments suggest the Soviets were searching for remnants of Projekt Thor, an advanced weapons initiative rumored to have been conducted in late 1944 as the Reich collapsed. Unlike the well-documented heavy water experiments in Norway, Thor remains almost entirely absent from German wartime files. The only surviving references are scattered in captured Wehrmacht communications noting new devices for total destruction, requiring special storage. One document, discovered by Polish archivists in 1992, identified an underground complex at Mechelinki, camouflaged as a naval supply depot. That site, long since flooded, became the focal point of the Soviet investigation. On July 12, 1947, 3 NKVD divers, Lieutenant Viktor Kolyadin, Senior Sergeant Grigory Pakomov, and Corporal Alexander Burkov, entered the submerged bunker system. They were tethered by steel lines, their oxygen fed from surface pumps aboard a converted minesweeper. The logbook of their commander, Captain Yevgeny Lavrov, recorded initial success. Entrance intact, heavy blast doors forced outward. Interior corridors partially collapsed, but machinery visible. 10 minutes later, Lavrov noted, Diver 2, erratic breathing, complaining of dizziness. Within minutes, communication ceased. 2 divers were recovered, unconscious, but Pakomov's line snapped with what the crew described as violent force from below. His body was never found. Autopsy reports on the others listed unexplained hemorrhaging of lung tissue. The incident was quietly classified under Operacja Sever 23. Moscow halted all further dives, but not before a small recovery team managed to extract metallic fragments coated in a black residue. Laboratory analysis labeled the material unidentified, alloy consistent with high radiation exposure. A marginal note from a Ministry of Medium machine building scientist compared it to samples from post-war Soviet nuclear testing grounds. Though the Mekalinki fragments predated the USSR's first atomic detonation by 2 years, the discovery raised an uncomfortable question. Had the Reich developed a warhead core prototype before its collapse? Western intelligence, too, showed signs of awareness. In 1950, the CIA intercepted a Polish naval memorandum describing removal of heavy equipment from Mechalinki bunker by Soviet technical units. The document implied Moscow had retrieved more than scraps. One passage read, "Object crated under triple seal. Destination Kaliningrad. Guards ordered to speak nothing." American analysts, in their post-war review, noted striking parallels between these descriptions and speculative Nazi blueprints for radiological dispersal weapons. Soviet secrecy fed speculation within Poland. Retired naval engineer Tadeusz Kruk, interviewed in 1975, recalled orders to transport sealed cylinders, heavily shielded, loaded at night, from a guarded convoy. He claimed the containers emitted enough heat to fog his glasses despite being insulated. When he raised questions, a superior officer told him, "Do not speak of it. It belongs to history that cannot be written." By the late 1950s, the trail grew colder. Warsaw Pact files indicate the site was deliberately collapsed with explosives, creating an artificial reef. Soviet engineers cited structural hazards, yet some scholars argue this was deliberate erasure, burying evidence of technology the Kremlin deemed too unstable to exploit. A classified Warsaw Military District memo, released after 1991, contains a single chilling phrase: "Thor sealed. Future generations must not unearth." Theories proliferated during the Cold War. Western analysts debated whether Thor was an attempt at a dirty bomb, dispersing radioactive material without achieving a true atomic detonation, or whether it represented a failed effort at a tactical fission device. Some pointed to German interest in heavy water, noting similarities with Allied concerns about Norwegian production facilities. Others dismissed it as Soviet exaggeration designed to justify post-war militarization of the Baltic coast. Still, the missing diver, the radiation anomalies, and the recovered fragments resist easy dismissal. In 1986, following the Chernobyl disaster, environmental surveys unexpectedly revived the controversy. Polish scientists measuring fallout along the Baltic littoral discovered unusually high baseline radiation levels near Mechalinki, far above expected background for the region. When questioned, Soviet officials insisted it was residual contamination from foreign testing. Yet Polish oceanographers found isotopic signatures inconsistent with atmospheric fallout. The implication was stark. Whatever lay beneath had been leaking for decades. Today, the ruins of the bunker remain sealed off, the area patrolled as a naval exclusion zone. Divers who have attempted unsanctioned entry report narrow tunnels choked, with debris, twisted steel doors fused shut, and chambers filled with fine black sediment. Some insist they have seen markings, stenciled eagles and Gothic lettering, still preserved beneath the silt. Officially, the Polish Ministry of Defense denies any active hazard, Yet declassified records confirm repeated cleanup operations into the 1990s. What exactly was Projekt Thor? The surviving evidence offers no certainty. The Soviets believed it was a weapons system of strategic consequence. The Americans suspected radiological dispersal. The Germans left behind only cryptic references. The Baltic villagers, for their part, remember only that men went into the sea and never came back. Whatever the truth, it remains sealed in concrete. Chambers beneath the waters off Gdansk, an artifact of war deliberately erased but never fully forgotten. In the winter of 1962, a US Army Signal Corps detachment stationed near Augsburg, Bavaria, intercepted a series of encrypted radio transmissions broadcast on an unusually low frequency. The signals, identified only as Edelweiss traffic in declassified intercept logs, displayed cipher structures nearly identical to wartime SS field codes. What startled analysts was not simply the encryption method, outdated but familiar, but the unmistakable use of contemporary references, including Argentine, place names and current dates. It suggested not relics of a war-long past, but a living network operating 17 years after Germany's defeat. The transcripts, now catalogued under US National Archives entry RG 457, file Edelweiss, record fragments such as cargo, secured, await coordinates, primary contact Patagonia. Another message referred to crates Alpha Delta relocated, do not compromise old airstrip. The persistence of such coded language raised urgent questions within Army intelligence and the CIA. Were these remnants of SS officers coordinating across continents, or an elaborate deception engineered by hostile actors during the Cold War? 2. Investigate the CIA-authorized Operation Tanager, a covert recovery mission launched in May 1962. A 7-man team from the Special Activities Division was dispatched to Patagonia, tasked with locating suspected cache sites identified in the intercepts. Their debrief, however, was never written. The men vanished after transmitting a final broken radio call. Multiple targets confirmed they are not alone. The message terminated mid-sentence. No subsequent communication was ever received. Officially, their transport aircraft was listed as lost in poor weather near the Andes. But an Argentine Air Force after-action report quietly filed away tells a different story. Local radar tracked the American aircraft descending toward a remote valley before contact abruptly ceased. A civilian shepherd interviewed days later described seeing a flash in the sky, not like thunder, and then silence. When wreckage was eventually located, Argentine officials noted 2 anomalies. The fuselage bore no signs of fire damage, and no human remains were recovered. Instead, search teams found 4 steel crates still lashed to the cargo bay, welded shut. Witnesses recall that within 24 hours, the crates were seized by US officials and flown out of the country under heavy guard. Their contents remain classified. What the Edelweiss network intended with such shipments is a matter of speculation. Some historians believe the crates contained currency, gold, or art looted during the Reich's final days, funneled through escape routes like ratlines to South America. Others, citing the urgency of the intercepts and the violence surrounding the recovery mission, suggest something more technical. Documents, prototypes, or devices linked to wartime projects. In a 1971 memo, declassified only in the 1990s, CIA analyst noted, item weights consistent with small engines or power units, further description withheld. The note ends abruptly, suggesting censorship even within internal correspondence. Survivors of German exile communities in Bariloche occasionally spoke in whispers of Edelweiss Gruppen, clandestine circles of former SS and Luftwaffe officers, maintaining discipline and chain of command years after surrender. Oral histories collected in the 1980s describe midnight meetings, coded insignia, and shipments arriving under cover of night. One elderly resident recounted being told as a boy never to walk near the old airstrip after dark because men with strange accents and black uniforms still came there. Whether these were exaggerations or memories distorted by fear, they echo the cryptic radio chatter intercepted in Bavaria. The disappearance of the CIA recovery team fueled internal debates. Some officials argued that Soviet counterintelligence orchestrated the entire affair, planting transmissions to lure Americans into hostile territory. Yet this theory weakens under scrutiny. The cipher structures matched authentic SS encryption manuals, and Soviet services had no reason to replicate them so precisely. Moreover, several transmissions contained personal identifiers of officers known to have fled to South America. Their names, absent from Allied prisoner lists, resurfaced in the intercepts, like ghosts refusing burial. In 1965, the Edelweiss traffic ceased as abruptly as it had begun. Analysts could not determine whether the network had been compromised, relocated, or simply disbanded. But lingering anomalies remain. Argentine archives contain records of police raids on warehouses in Neuquén during the same period. Seizures, listed only as foreign property, sealed. Witnesses recall trucks carrying long wooden crates under armed escort, bound for Buenos Aires. No public inventory was ever released. By the 1970s, mention of Edelweiss within intelligence circles dwindled to a classified footnote. The missing CIA team was quietly reassigned in records as training casualties. Families of the operatives received only vague letters citing operational hazards in overseas deployment. Not a single body was repatriated. Their names, unlike most Cold War dead, were absent from official memorial rosters, a silence more telling than any document. Decades later, fragments continue to surface. In 2001, a researcher combing through Argentine municipal records uncovered reference to German-origin sealed containers stored in a government warehouse until 1964, then transferred abroad by foreign liaison. In 2014, a retired Polish cryptographer revealed that during his service in NATO's Signals Division, he had been shown a tape of the Edelweiss broadcasts. He remembered one phrase in particular: "The mission is not finished. Await final instruction." The Edelweiss Ciphers remain one of the Cold War's most unsettling mysteries. Living proof, perhaps, that networks of the defeated Reich persisted, organized and disciplined, into an era when the world had convinced itself such shadows no longer existed. The disappearance of the CIA team, the sealed crates, and the abrupt end of transmissions suggest a story carefully erased, preserved only in fragments of static across the shortwave bands. Somewhere, beneath the weight of deliberate silence, the truth still waits to be decoded. In March 1951, Argentine police conducting routine checks near Bariloche stumbled upon an unmarked cache buried in shallow earth. Inside were steel cylinders containing stacks of German-language documents, many stamped with Reichsadler insignia and classified designations. The files, quickly confiscated and transferred to Buenos Aires, referenced something called Projekt Morgenstern, a late-war Luftwaffe initiative tied to high-altitude reconnaissance and optical technologies far beyond the capabilities of the Allies in 1945. The cache was never made public. Within weeks, it was handed over to US military attachés and flown out of the country. The paper trail ends there. What little is known of Morgenstern survives in fragments. Argentine archival slips describe blueprints of aerial craft optimized for extreme atmospheric ascent. Marginalia included sketches of wingless fuselage profiles resembling elongated cylinders, fitted with large observation domes. Notably, one document cited film transport secured for priority target zones, suggesting the aircraft was intended not for combat, but for reconnaissance photography at unprecedented altitudes. Allied intelligence officers who reviewed the files in 1951 described the project as anticipatory of post-war spy plane designs. One note, preserved in a CIA briefing, added cryptically, "Prototype possibly flown, confirmation required." The question of a prototype has haunted researchers ever since. Czechoslovak wartime archives hold one tantalizing clue. In April 1945, local villagers near Jatek recalled unusual activity at a Luftwaffe installation codenamed Flugplatz Albatros. Witnesses spoke of a strange silver object, longer than a bomber but without wings, hauled by trucks into a hangar under guard. Days later, Several claimed they heard an unfamiliar roar overhead, followed by the appearance of a luminous contrail climbing vertically into cloud. The Reich was collapsing at that very moment, yet such accounts persist, recorded by Czech investigators decades later. American intelligence appeared to treat the Bariloche cache as more than myth. In 1952, a joint intelligence objectives agency memo noted documents retrieved abroad regarding German aerial reconnaissance prototypes, secure against Soviet acquisition. The memo included a line redacted in later releases but partially legible. Film reels unknown, destination not yet verified. The mention of film reels echoes witness accounts from Czechoslovakia, who swore the prototype carried specialized cameras. Where those reels might have been sent, if they existed at all, remains unanswered. Skeptics argue Morgenstern was merely a design study, never realized. Yet the consistency of reports raises troubling questions. Why were the documents buried? In Argentina, a known refuge for fleeing SS officers and Luftwaffe engineers. Why were they spirited out by US officials with such urgency? And why, in subsequent years, do we find scattered references to German origin optics surfacing in CIA files relating to early U-2 program development? One former Lockheed engineer, speaking anonymously in a 1979 interview, admitted, "We were shown film camera designs from Europe that were decades ahead of ours. No one said where they came from. The Bariloche cache itself has vanished." Argentine. Police logs confirm its seizure, but all custody records after 1951 are blank. Families of officers involved later spoke of being pressured into silence. One recalled his father's nervous insistence that foreign men in suits took the documents away, warning that the sky holds secrets you cannot imagine. The officer never spoke of it again. Declassified British intelligence files add one final piece. In 1946, a captured Luftwaffe technical officer interrogated at RAF Farnborough mentioned a Morgenstern flight, describing it as our last hope to see the enemy's secrets from above the clouds. He claimed a single launch took place in April 1945, destination undisclosed. When pressed for evidence, he replied only, "The cameras know the truth, not I." His statement was buried in interrogation summaries until rediscovered in the 1990s. What might those cameras have recorded? Some speculate they were intended to document advancing Soviet forces, offering Berlin a final intelligence advantage. Others suggest targets farther afield, perhaps even Allied industrial centers, filmed from a vantage point beyond interception. Whatever the objective, no film reels have surfaced. If they were recovered, they remain locked away in sealed archives, labeled as spoils of war too sensitive to disclose. The absence of wreckage is equally haunting. No airframe, no engine, no debris tied definitively to Morgenstern has ever been found. If the prototype flew from Czechoslovakia in April 1945, it either returned to its hangar and was destroyed, or it never came back. Rumors in Argentina spoke of a strange aircraft dismantled and hidden in the Andes during the late 1940s. But no material proof has emerged. Only the buried documents point to its existence. Projekt Morgenstern remains one of the war's most tantalizing phantoms. A reconnaissance craft too advanced for its time, designed in secrecy, lost in collapse, and possibly flown in the chaos of Germany's final days. The fragments, scattered testimonies, sealed files, erased records, converge on a single theme: that something lifted from the airfields of Czechoslovakia in April 1945 and was never meant to be remembered. That the Allies moved so swiftly to seize and bury its traces only strengthens the suspicion that its truth was not merely speculative, but operational. The world may never know what those cameras saw, or why their reels remain missing. All that is certain is this: in the silence of classified vaults in Washington and London, Morgenstern still waits, sealed in darkness like the buried cache from which its name first resurfaced. In November 1944, deep within the collapsing Reich, scattered reports surfaced of an obscure unit operating in occupied Scandinavia under the name Sonderkommando Nachtwind, Special Detachment Night Wind. Unlike the notorious Einsatzgruppen or the well-documented V-weapons programs, Nachtwind left behind almost no direct record. What remains are fragmentary interrogations, captured documents, and whispered testimony from Allied radar operators, who, in the final months of the war, claimed to witness aircraft appearing and vanishing from screens without explanation. The full, first traceable reference is buried in a French Deuxième Bureau report from March 1945, discovered decades later in the archives of the Service Historique de la Défense. It describes a Wehrmacht logistics officer captured near Caen, who spoke under interrogation of an invisible wing deployed in Norway. His words were dismissed at the time as delirium, yet a handwritten annotation in the margin reads, "Cross-check with RAF radar anomalies, Kirkenes sector." The link between the testimony and real operational interference was never officially investigated. Allied radar logs from that winter record several unexplained gaps. On January 17, 1945, British operators at RAF Buchan noted a Luftwaffe bomber blip vanish entirely over the North Sea, reappearing 40 miles east minutes later without any sign of descent. Operators assumed instrument failure, until multiple stations reported identical phenomena on separate occasions. Similar accounts emerge in US Navy reports filed during convoy escorts to Murmansk. Ships complained of sudden blind spots lasting seconds, coinciding with the approach of German aircraft. At the time, these disruptions were chalked up to atmospheric interference. The strongest documentary link comes from Wehrmacht Akten 12b, fragments of which were seized by French forces in Strasbourg in April 1945. Page headers identify Sonderkommando Nachtwind Obersalzberg Directive, but entire sections had been burned. Surviving passages refer to field testing of Geräte zur Funkstörung, radio interference devices, and successful suppression of enemy detection for 12 to 15 seconds. Attached sketches, crude but legible, showed angular devices mounted beneath the fuselage of a Junkers Ju-88. Engineers familiar with the drawings later suggested it resembled a crude form of active jamming array, far ahead of what was believed possible in 1944. The trail grows darker in Norway. Post-war Norwegian police reports mention caves outside Tromsø dynamited shut by retreating Germans in early May 1945. Witnesses saw trucks loaded with large crates escorted by SS guards to the site days before the demolitions. Locals reported hearing machine noises underground long after the surrender. When British investigators attempted to survey the area in 1946, they were blocked by Royal Norwegian Army officers, citing security directives issued in London. No further records of that survey survive. Survivor testimony complicates the narrative. In 1952, former resistance fighter Leif Østgaard gave a private statement to Oslo journalists, claiming his unit had observed a German aircraft over Tromsø that seemed to vanish in the clouds, though the sky was clear. He added, "Our radio went dead when it passed. We thought the devil himself had flown over." His account was never published, suppressed under pressure from the Norwegian Ministry of Defense. Copies only surfaced in 1999, after Østgaard's death. By the Cold War, Nachtwind had faded into near myth. Yet NATO intelligence periodically revisited the question. A declassified 1961 SHAPE report contains a passage strikingly similar to the French annotation from 1945. Enemy device produced temporary radar invisibility during late war trials in Norway. Uncertain if technology was captured by Soviets. Post-war, recommend monitoring for anomalous jamming signatures in Kola region. Whether this was precautionary speculation or based on classified evidence remains unknown. The Soviets, for their part, seemed aware. Declassified GRU summaries from 1947 reference German equipment recovered from Nord-Norge caves, possible radar suppression systems. No technical analysis accompanies these notes, but the phrasing suggests Soviet technical units considered the device is credible. If recovered, they may have contributed to the rapid Soviet progress in electronic warfare throughout the 1950s. The British archives are perhaps the most unsettling. Among the AIR-40 series at Kew lies a single surviving file titled Nightwind. Its 3 surviving pages detail internal Air Ministry correspondence. Questions have arisen regarding reports of vanished Luftwaffe aircraft in northern sectors. If such devices existed, their capture would pose significant risk in Soviet hands. File restricted indefinitely. The file abruptly ends, the remainder marked withdrawn. What remains today are ruins. Dynamited tunnels near Tromsø, still cordoned off by Norwegian authorities under the guise of safety hazards. Amateur explorers claim to have recovered twisted metal fragments from the scree, etched with serial numbers in Gothic script. One such fragment, smuggled into private hands in 1987, was examined by an electronics historian who concluded the alloy composition was unusually pure aluminum, consistent with high-frequency applications. He was later contacted by government officials and asked to surrender the piece. It has not been seen since. Whether Nachtwind represented a genuine wartime breakthrough or a series of exaggerated reports remains unresolved. Yet the consistency of testimony across Allied logs, captured documents, and post-war witness accounts lends the story weight. Aircraft did vanish from screens. Radios did fail. Crates were buried, and files were erased. The Reich was collapsing in chaos. Yet within that chaos, it appears a handful of engineers and SS officers pursued a final project intended to blind the enemy's eyes. That it disappeared into sealed caves, missing archives, and ambiguous post-war silence only deepens the unease. Nachtwind is less a story of technological triumph than of deliberate erasure, a reminder that some shadows of the Second World War have never been dispelled, only hidden. The wars ended, but the silence did not. Beneath official histories and memorial stones, there are doors that remain sealed, guarded by the weight of secrecy. Every erased file, every missing name, every shadowed operation hints at a deeper reckoning, never faced. The truth survives not in records, but in absence, in the void where answers should be. What remains is the dread certainty that some battles were never meant to end, only to disappear.